Sammamish. I'm fairly new to the job, so I am learning along with all of you. So I appreciate you taking the time out tonight. I have asked Aaron Anton, our Director of Finance and Assistant City Manager, to give the overview of how the budget works tonight. And Mike Sugg and I, Mike works in the city manager's office with me. Mike and I are here to help with questions and to track what questions we have, and anything that we can't answer, we'll try to get back and post it on the website for everyone to be able to see what the answer is. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, but I want to remind everyone that we are recording the meeting, so that if you want to go back and watch it, or anyone who wasn't able to join us tonight is free to go back and watch it, and we will post it on the city's candidate website for everyone later this week. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Aaron to give his presentation, and then we will open it up for questions. And like I said previously, we've received some questions from both Melanie and Karen Howe, and so we will try to get to those at the end of Aaron's presentation. And then if anyone else has questions, we will take those as well. What I would ask when we get to that point is if you would use your hand raise icon to ask a question, and then I'll moderate from there so that we can make sure that I get the questions in the order that people raise their hand, just to make sure we get everyone's input. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Aaron to take over and do the presentation. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, so hello, everyone. This is Aaron Anton. I'm Assistant City Manager, Finance Director here at the city. One thing with Teams is once I go into sharing content for presentation mode, I can't see if there's questions. So I'm going to rely on you, Scott, to catch me there if I need to go over and answer questions for a bit.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you all should be seeing very shortly a slideshow appear for you.
Yep.
Scott, you're the only one that posts that I can see. So if you can nod to say we're good to go. All right. So
really quick, Aaron,
yes.
hang on. Let me just get a sort of a head nod from everyone else to make sure that you're all seeing the same thing, just so that we're not missing anybody. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. All right, please proceed.
Okay, so just a quick overview first. Some basic background on Sammamish. Was incorporated in August 31st of 1999. We currently have in 2021 133.25 full-time employees that have been approved by City Council. Our population, based on the Office of Financial Management of the state, for 2021 is 66,130 residents. And the form of government that we have is a council manager form of government. That's different than a strong mayor, for example, that Issaquah or Redmond currently have. Who do we serve? So this is some basic profile information from the American Community Survey. It was back from 2018. That just gives a relative overview of the type of individuals that live within Sammamish, and from that community survey data. So you can see that information on the screen. I won't go through each of the lines, but it gives you an idea of who we're serving. So basic overview of the org chart for the city. Basic services or overview of services here. All of the logos that you see: community development, parks and rec, public works, which also includes our stormwater management utility. The water and sewer utilities are not part of public works. Those are part of two different special purpose districts for Sammamish. But the public works does have the stormwater utility, but water and sewer are not part of that. Then finance and IT, and then several of our large contracted services are fire and emergency services through Eastside Fire and Rescue, is who we contract with and are a partner in that organization. And then police services are also contracted. They're contracted through King County Sheriff's Office. So that's who that contract is with. And then our municipal court is contracted through King County as well. So those types of services are all large contracts. And then the ones on the top of the line there are in-house city services that are provided. So one thing to note here is library services are not in here. We don't have a city-owned library, so that's also done through the King County Library. City Manager's Office provides overall management direction to all departments and coordinates activities with the City Council. So there's the City Manager is appointed by the council, and that position serves as the business manager for the city and recommends and advises the council on a broad array of issues. And so you can see some of those listed there. So getting into the budget information, our budget process itself is governed by the state of Washington. So you may hear from time to time the acronym RCW. That stands for Revised Code of Washington. It's the state laws that govern the process for budgeting in the state of Washington and for optional municipal charter code cities, of which Sammamish is. So the specific statute that we're governed by is RCW 35A.34, and it's that optional charter code. That allows, the .34 statute allows for a biennial budget versus an annual budget process. So that is the budget process that we have as a biennial budget. And it's also adopted and complies with the Budget and Accounting Reporting System, or what's referred to as BARS accounting system, that the state legislature has put in place and has given authority to the state auditor's office to audit cities for compliance. So this is all governed by the state, and then through the separate state agency, the state auditor's office sets forth the BARS regulations, and then municipalities have to comply with the BARS that the state auditor then comes and audits us, and that is to inform the state legislature. So the classification and coding system is all governed by the state there. Already mentioned that we are on a biennial budget, which is a 2-year budget. The first year per state law is always an odd number year. So that's how the state law sets it up. And so we are in 2021, 2022 biennial budget period at the moment. That budget contains both operating and capital funds. And one of the things that we note that the budget is a plan for all intents and purposes, but it's also the law. So it is adopted by City Council into an ordinance when they do the adoption of the biennial budget. So that becomes local law. So it's setting the restrictions on spending and what proceeds are in place for the city when council makes that adoption. Must meet the RCWs that were referenced before. And then just a note on the Sammamish process, GFOA stands for the Government Finance Officers Award and Association, or I should say GFOA is the association. And then we have received the award for several years, going back to the early history of the city. So have a standard of excellence in city budgeting processes that meet the national association criteria. Those documents are on the city website, the most currently adopted ones, as well as there's a budget and brief document you may be familiar with. That's kind of a summary of the larger budget document that provides just an overview on more summarized issues. Down at the bottom is a rough outline of the timeline associated with the budget adoption process. So typically,
So am I the only one who's frozen or, okay. So ironically, Aaron went into City Hall to make sure that he didn't have connection issues. So bear with us for a moment here and we'll see if we can get this sorted out. Apologies, everyone. This is the joys of everyone being remote. All right. Looks like Aaron will rejoin us momentarily. Again, appreciate your patience while we try to get him back on board. You're muted, Aaron.
It's like I dropped off there.
Yep.
So you learned everything you needed to know about the budget, right? That's okay. Let me see. I don't know if that was the slide you all were on. Let me try to reshare and see if we got the right slide here, Scott.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we were you were starting to talk about the timeline at the bottom of the slide, and that's when we lost you.
Okay. So I'll try to speak quicker. General timeline is at the bottom of this slide there. First half of the year, council direction, then we get into more of the budget prep internally, and then city manager recommendation, and then the formal public hearings on the budget and adoption. The 2-year budget is a part of this is kind of a filter that comes down from the comp plan, which is a much larger 20-year plan, into separate capital improvement plans, which are 6-year plans. And then the appropriations are set at the 2-year budgeting period. So for what budget we're operating in right now, it's the 21-22 budget period. When we're developing a budget, this is the general timeline for that. Again, a reminder that the 21-22 budget's already been adopted by council. State law does provide for an annual mid-biennial review and potential modification. So that's the process that you may hear about as it continues into the fall here, is that modification process. And that is kind of an abbreviated amendment to the budget that has already been adopted by council. So if the city manager is recommending certain changes, those are brought forward to council for them to consider and then potentially roll into the adopted 21-22 budget. That's what that is related to. The other things to note on this slide are the property tax deadlines. So annually, there is a November 30th deadline for the city to remit its property tax levy. We file it with King County. The King County Assessor's Office is the one that collects that information from each of the cities within King County. And so that process is run, and the public hearings held in November to set the local property tax levy that would then be sent to the county by the end of November. And then that would be rolled up into all the other city inputs that the county is receiving for them setting the 22 property tax levy for all municipalities in King County. So a quick overview on our particular funds that we have within our city budget. There's general operations funds. That's the general fund, and these are the numbers of the funds are referenced there in case you're cross-referencing to the budget document or other financial reports. General fund has a fund number 001, and so this is where most of the unrestricted funds are held, and then the general purpose is described. So it's a kind of a general purpose fund. The street fund is a special revenue fund. So this is for street fuel taxes, primarily showing the use of how those are spent and received by the city. That's in fund number 101. And then the ARPA is a brand new fund that's been created in 2021. So just this year. This is the American Recovery Plan Act Fund. And so this is just specifically for the federal funds that are coming into the city in the 2021 and 2022 period. So that is brand new fund number 002. So you'll see that in documents as we roll forward. The capital funds, there's 3 of them. There's a general capital fund, a parks capital, and a transportation capital fund with the corresponding fund numbers. They're the 300 series. Proprietary funds or utility funds are sometimes referred to as the utility fund that the city has. Again, I mentioned that the water sewer is not part of the city, so this would just be the stormwater or surface water utility fund for a proprietary fund, and that has 2 specific funds. One's on the operating side, that's fund number 408, and one's on the capital side of stormwater, and that's 438. So those two together form the one utility fund that we have. And then the internal service funds are 500 series. These are the ones that support the other departments. So it's the fleet and equipment reserve, that's the 501, the information technology fund. So that's for all of our IT equipment and reserving for larger IT capital needs. And then the risk management fund, it's our liability insurance that the city has, and that's in the 503 fund. So those are those particular internal service funds. It's not a way to look at that or view that as it's not new money. These are funded by internal transfers between existing funds. So it's not a separate revenue source that's funding those. Overall fund chart, this just puts it in an org chart standpoint. Again, looking at the capital and the operating funds. The new fund to this mix is that ARPA fund that we were talking about. It's considered a special operating fund because it does come in from the federal funding level. And so the US Treasury is in the process of setting the requirements of that fund. And we're setting it up as a separate fund just for the accounting and reporting aspect of that so we can track that as those funds are received and then get expended through the 21-22 period. So our total revenue budget, 160 million, that excludes the transfers. So the transfers are money moving from fund to fund within the city budget. So excluding that, the 160 million. From a revenue standpoint, 93 million of that 160 is our beginning fund balance. So when we came in the year in 2021, that's the balance that we had coming into the year. And then we're adding revenues in these other categories. So the largest category would be taxes. Again, you can see breakdowns of each of these either in the budget and brief or the budget document itself. Largest tax source, just for your reference, property tax is the largest tax source for the city. It's about 30 million of that 45. And then you have each of the other funding sources listed there: surface water fees, grants, fees for services, miscellaneous mitigation fees, etc. On the expenditure side for 2021, again, matches the 160 million. We have an ending balance in total of 76 million. So at the end of the 21 budget period, we have a balance of 76 million, and then the other expenditures by fund are listed there. The capital projects, 15 million. General fund is the largest, 50 million there, and then the other funds listed as well. In total, this table A is what is attached to the budget ordinance itself that City Council adopts. So this kind of becomes our legal table, for lack of a better term there, on the ordinance adoption itself, that lists out each of the fund names and their numbers. And then for the 21-22 period, shows the totals for their beginning balances, their ending balances, and then revenues and expenditures by fund coming in throughout those that 2-year period. So we do show it as 2 separate years. We kind of manage that internally as 2 years, but it is a 2-year total budget. So 21-22 is grouped together. And so these are all adopted amounts. So when we look and treat expenditures that are adopted at this, for example, the 123.8 million, that is the expenditure total for 2021. That's the total adopted expenditure budget in 2021. And then 2022, it's 91.39 million in expenditures. So if you add up those two, that's the total expenditure budget for the 21-22 period, for example. The arrows are highlighting the ending fund balances. So there's typically a lot of conversation around, well, how are you coming to the, how are you looking coming to the end of the budget period? So in the 2022, the end, this is the revised picture. Most recent action was taken by council at the June 15th meeting. And so we're coming in with an ending fund balance in the general fund of 32.55 million is what's budgeted currently. So that's considered a forecast number. And then in total for at the end of 2022, total ending fund balance of 61 million is where that is currently depicted and currently at. So these numbers would be revisited when we get into the review and modification process that is the mid-buy, so later this fall. And if there's any amendments that are recommended by the city manager and then any council actions that take place, those could adjust these numbers as we move into the 2022 budget period. So that's kind of how those were. Oh, there was a question related to restricted use of ending fund balance. So terminology on reserves versus ending fund balance. So typically from an accounting sense, we look at the ending fund balance being the balance for a particular fund. So if I'm looking at that general fund in 2022, the 32.556 million, that's the ending fund balance for the general fund. By policy, if you were looking in our budget document, you could have noticed that the council has adopted a separate strategic reserve policy. And the method for calculating that is a 10% of the general fund revenues. So using the numbers here on this chart, the 10% strategic reserve, we go to that 48,144,273 in 2022 as the budgeted revenue. 10% of that is 4.8 million. So the strategic reserve becomes an assignment on the 32.556 million ending fund balance. 4.8 million of that is reserved for that 10% strategic reserve. So that's kind of how those policy decisions intersect with the ending fund balance requirements that we show. The other funds besides general fund. So general fund is what houses kind of the general purpose revenues and expenditures where you're less restrictions on those coming in. Other funds may be established for specific purposes. We already talked about the ARPA fund that is specifically the federal funding that's coming in and going out of that. So that one is listed as a separate fund for that different purpose. The other restrictions that might be talked about are in the capital funds. There's certain revenues that are coming into the capital funds. For example, real estate excise taxes are dedicated towards capital projects. And so the city per council policy sets half of it into the parks capital fund and half of it into the transportation capital improvement fund. And so that restriction on those revenues resides within the capital funds themselves. So if we were asked the question of how much of those capital funds is restricted for capital, the way we would view that is all of the ending fund balance in those capital funds is restricted for the purposes of the fund itself. And given that they're 300 series funds, they're all capital, so it's restricted to capital use. And then the REIT funds that are going into that fund would also be restricted based on whatever state restrictions they carry as they come into the fund. So the state can also restrict certain uses of revenues that are coming into those funds. So that's kind of how those things interact. I think my last slide is more on different current, future financial health activities that are going on. Just giving a brief overview of snapshot here, 3 bullets. Revenue forecast, we are experiencing strong sales taxes in Sammamish. So that has not been as much a hit to Sammamish as it has been to some other jurisdictions that have suffered more from drop in sales tax activity during the pandemic. That has not occurred on our sales taxes. We actually have received more in sales taxes, likely because of the behavior changes that folks are having more things delivered to them. And so sales taxes are paid, the local portion, paid at point of delivery. And so versus point of sale. And when they're paid at point of delivery and the goods and services are delivered to their homes, they're ordering on Amazon or online sale retailers and having those things delivered, then the local share of those sales tax goes to that jurisdiction. So in our case, Sammamish. So that activity has increased during the pandemic. So that's helpful during the current time. Real estate excise tax also have continued to come in and are doing better than budget estimates. Property and sales have continued to, that activity has continued to strengthen throughout the 2021 period. So those are good things happening. We've had several grant awards. And that's been helpful. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the property taxes. Just a reminder that in the state of Washington, municipalities are limited by the state for a 1% increase in their regular levy. So that is every year that measure is made by the King County assessor when they send us that information on what we can increase our regular levy limit by. That 1% statute is in place. There is a provision in that law that the increase is 1% or the increase in the implicit price deflator. And this only comes up very rarely over time. Typically, the implicit price deflator, or IPD, is greater than 1%, and so the 1% cap is in place. But occasionally, I think a couple times in the last 10 years, it's been less, and so there's further action that has to take place for the 1% lid to be put in place on property taxes. So that exists, and then Sammamish is also in the unique situation where we have remaining banked property tax capacity. So you'll likely hear more conversation about this in the fall when we're when the city's looking at they're setting their property tax levy for 2022. Half of the available bank capacity still remains. So this is something that council had acted on last budget cycle. And setting the 21-22 budget. They agreed to levy half of the available bank capacity, and the other half they did not levy. And so that's still banked. And so that's a decision point that would come in front of them at the time that they would consider property tax action for 2022. So that bank capacity, if you're interested in more details, or I can only see Scott, so I'm not seeing if people are interested in more on that, but we can talk more if we want on that one. Council, city manager, expenditure, levels of service decisions, those are all part of the budgeting process. Some notes here, operations through June. We do have existing position vacancy rates have been running around 25% vacancies, and that's in our budgeted position count. So we're not at full staffing in our current 21-22 budget period. There are budgeted police service ads coming, so some police officers positions were added in the adopted 21-22 budget. Those police patrol and sergeant positions have not actually entered into service, but they have been authorized to have as an ad coming in the 21-22 budget period. An additional note that hits the expenditure category, larger items here are the city's first collective bargaining agreement was signed here in July, and that is a 3-year agreement. So it would take effect in 21-22 and in the future 2023 budget period. Just then, the final note is on fund balances and the use of that. Council can also take action on those things during a current budget period. They have done that in 2021 and using and identifying some of the fund balance for a large road capital project. So there was a loan that they were making from the general fund to support the cash flow for the road project. The plan is to have that repaid to the general fund by the end of 2021, but that continues to be tracked through the 2021 period. Other types of uses, street overlay programs, stormwater capital facilities, there's other infrastructure needs. So all of those things are weighed and evaluated as the fund balances are reviewed as part of the mid-buy process that the city manager and then council would go through. And I think that is my last slide.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm getting a little reverb there. Apologize for that. Thank you, Aaron, very much. I really appreciate it. I want to hit one really quickly question that Josh asked because I think it's a pretty easy one, and then we'll move to the questions that have been submitted previously. Josh asked if you can reclassify REIT after the fact. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but Aaron, I'm gonna let you answer that one for sure.
The REIT, technically, no, you can't reclassify it. It's coming in, it's identified, it goes into the fund for its intended purpose and use. If it's sitting there, so we usually look at it forward thinking. So the policy is about whether we allocate 50% into one capital fund or another, or we split it differently than that. That's typically where the council policy resides. So it's future focused versus past focused.
Sure, but I would also say that, Josh, that the REIT is designated by state law as to what you can use it for, and there's no changing that component of it. So it just depends on what, if it's REIT 1 or REIT 2 really dictates what the uses are available to use the money for. So REIT 2 is pretty limited. It's kind of pretty clear where it has to go. REIT 1 has a little more flexibility, as I recall. Okay, so I believe that Melanie's questions were the first ones in the door. So I'm gonna read those off, and then Aaron, I think you and I can kind of tag team on the answers. So Melanie, let me ask you this question. The first question you asked was provide a list of the high level programs that are included in the operating budget. So after the presentation, do you feel like those are answered, or do you want a little more clarification on anything there?
Well, probably more clarification. Because I sat through all the budget meetings in the fall, and so but they go into a lot of detail, and I was just wanting the high level. So what sort of programs do we do in the budget? That's really my question. And I've never seen anything that really tells me that. I've seen everything that tells me how many positions they have and how much they spend on travel and how much they spend on training, but that's really getting into the minutia.
Right.
And that was more where I was going. Is I was just interested to know what are we doing with the money? What are we getting? We as citizens getting? That was
Sure.
where my question was going. And if you can't answer it here, that's fine. If you know somewhere where I can get the answer at some point in time.
Sure. I think we can do a mix of both. I think we can provide you the direct link, but I think the short answer is that the budget really it lays out what the programs are. And so, like, for instance, in community development, for instance, we do permitting and we do planning at its basic level.
Right. Yes.
So for public works, we do the roads. We work on the roads. We do small projects. We manage projects that we contract out for, do road overlays, and then stormwater does all the stormwater projects. And so we have staff that are out maintaining our roadways. Public Works also does the roadway plantings in the medians and street trees. All those are things that Public Works is responsible for, and stormwater, those two at a broad level. And then, we provide money for human services to human service agencies, and we have our Human Services Commission. We have internal service departments that only serve, like IT and human resources. Yep. Those are internal service. The clerk's department does business licenses. They do all of the, the council meetings. They provide all the information. They do public disclosure requests are through the clerk's office. I'm sorry, we also have like passport services through community development. And then the parks provides, as you can imagine, all of any of the programming that we do, which is relatively limited, but we do some, and all of the parks maintenance at all of our parks. So that's a really, really high level, but it doesn't get a whole lot more detailed than that in terms of what services we provide. But we can provide you the link, and I'm looking at Mike because he is the knowledgeable one on where all the stuff resides. And we will put that on the candidate website so everybody has access to that. But that's
No, and
kind of where,
that's good. What you said was good. I think part of I think I was trying to make it more complicated than it is.
yeah,
I
I mean, I
think that
think,
because when you said it, I was like, yeah. So yeah, I think I was trying to make it more complicated.
well, and to be fair, you know, the city is a big use of contracted services.
Hmm.
So a lot of that stuff, they're not internal service, you know, departments, they're external.
Yep.
And we just essentially write the check and say, thank you very much.
Mhm.
That's a mistake. I mean, we do more than that, but in essence, they're not city employees and they're not part of the, you know, the budget count and all that other kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the fees are pretty much fixed in terms of what we have to pay for those. So that's how, you know, we kind of differentiate, what do we have effect over and what don't we have effect over?
Yep.
Okay, your next question was about explaining the relationship between ending fund balance and reserves. I think we got there, but
Yep.
tell me.
That was
Okay.
good. That was the answer I was looking for.
Perfect. Okay. Question 3 was explain the 1% annual tax increase. And maybe you might want a little bit more. I don't know how deep in the woods we want to go this. And every time we go here, I'm gonna bless Aaron for understanding this. Because I always get confused trying to explain it. But if you all would like more, I can ask Aaron to go into a little bit more detail about how that works.
So on page 9 of the budget in brief, it also has an explanation of the property tax piece. This was part of the presentation when we were looking at bank capacity versus the 1% allowable increase in the regular levy. So I would say there's a lot of confusion typically just around how much of the property taxes that show up on a resident's property tax bill actually go to the city for city provided services versus to other entities within King County or the state itself. So there's our school district, all of those other are larger levies that are a part of that bill that they're paying on their property taxes. And so King County Assessor sends out a pie chart that breaks that down, you know, the percentage that's going to your local city versus the state versus the county, for example, or school district. So that has more information that's specific to each resident. So you can get that, and that's available online as well to King County Assessor's site. There's a parcel-based system. You can pull up your actual parcel and get that specific to your information. So that's available as an information source out there. The city part of it, the hat, is just that 1%, which is a smaller portion of the residents' property tax bill that just goes to local services. And then the 1% cap applies to that piece of the regular levy. So that's the only control that the city would have over that component of property taxes.
And maybe just to add on to that, Aaron, I think what I would say to that, Melanie, is the city has the option to take that 1% increase. That's definitely a policy decision that the city can make. The city manager is going to make a recommendation based on, you know, generally it's been over the past few years, and Aaron, please correct me if I misspeak here, but the cost increase have been going up more than 1%. So it's definitely a balancing act to decide whether or not to take some or all of that 1% every year. So that's always a decision that is made at the council level as to whether or not that's something they want to take on. Any other questions on the 1%? Fantastic. Okay, and again, this is not the end of it. If you walk away from this and go, wait a minute, I still don't get it, please shoot us a question and we'll throw it on the Canada website, because this one is it is not intrinsic. Okay. The next question was, please explain how the open head count is budgeted each year. Once adopted, do positions are they carried over from year to year? And do they get evaluated to ensure whether they are still truly needed? So I'll ask Aaron to address the first two, and then I'll address the third one.
Yes, so budgeted FTEs, so that's the 133.25 is our approved FTE count. That's part of the budget adoption itself that council sets in their 21-22. In this last budget process, council also passed a motion to further restrict. So we were budgeting 133.25, but further restrict FTEs to not hire any above 130. So there was an additional restriction put in by council on that. Now, those are budgeted positions. So when we refer to open, those could be, I'm interpreting that as vacancies, right? So a person leaves a position or it's a new position that was never hired. And so that those are open in my mind, the open positions. So yes, those are reevaluated regularly prior to hire. So the city manager and HR both work together on evaluating positions that become open during the course of a budget period prior to moving forward with either filling the position or continuing to hold on filling it or restructuring how those services are delivered. So that's just an ongoing evaluation that's made as we roll through the period. Obviously, vacancies, you don't necessarily have a whole lot of control over as far as the rolling number throughout the year. So it's going to, your actual FTEs are going to bounce up and down as you move from a reporting standpoint throughout the budget period. They're not all going to sit at 130 for the whole year, for example. So we do have, there's a financial management report, quarterly financial management report that's also available on the city website. It's a document and there's I think a couple pages that are dedicated just to FTEs that show further information on both full-time equivalents as well as limited term positions. And then we have seasonal and temp help hires. So all of those personnel related types of positions are reported out on as we progress quarterly throughout the budget period.
And I'm going to ask Mike if you would drop that on the candidate website so it's easy to find. That would be fantastic. Thank you. And then the third one, I think Aaron, you answered it, but do they get evaluated to ensure they're still truly needed? That happens with every budget process. That's one of the things that we go through at a policy level about, providing services, because really there's nobody that there's no position that doesn't have an associated body of work for obvious reasons. So we're always reviewing and each department director and supervisor is reviewing, is there still work for that body of work? And if not, then are we going to do something different? So it is, but in general, there's generally a body of work that's not being completed when we add a position. So hope that answers that question. Okay, and the last one from Melanie, at least so for the time being, is please explain all the unfunded mandates in the city budget. How much is each one? When did they start? How will the new public safety bills passed this legislative session impact the city budget? Will we see an increase in the amount from our King County contract? So I'll take a quick stab at that, and Aaron, please feel free to jump in. And I'm going to start backwards first, and we'll say that the King County contract is in place, and it has an inflator for every year as part of the contract. So that's pretty much set until it's time to renegotiate the new contract. So anything that happened in the legislature this year, it won't get reflected until we renegotiate when this current contract is up. So that's kind of how that plays out. As far as the unfunded mandates, boy, that is a loaded question. That's pretty, well, I don't know that we all have enough time this evening to get into that one. I think ultimately the answer is, we have some core basic services that we have to provide. And then there are some services that as a policy level, the council can choose to provide. But for the most part, we are in much more in the core services category. And I would differentiate essentially between what we must have and what is nice to have. Mm-hmm. For instance, parks are nice to have. We do not have to provide parks. Whereas police services, court services, roads, those things are in the we must provide those, just to differentiate a little bit. Now, I think everyone would agree that if we said we're no longer going to do parks, there would be probably a storming of the castle. And that's fine, but that's just kind of how those shake out. Unfunded mandates are, they've been going on for years, and there's really no way to tilt at that windmill in any way, shape, or form that, when that kind of stuff comes up, we're part of the Statewide Cities Association, and they advocate on behalf of cities. And this is a constant refrain with them. They chip away at this every year to mild effect. But we can have a longer conversation about that if you'd really like to. I'm happy to chat with you about that, but that's an ongoing, there's not a lot we can do in the moment. The next set of questions, Melanie, please, I hope that answered that question, at least for right now. And again, I'm happy to follow up if you'd like to. Next up, Karen submitted some questions, so we're going to jump into those and see if we can get through these. And everybody else, please, as we're answering or the questions being asked, if you have an add-on or you want to ask something else, please just raise your hand thing and I'll make sure to grab you. First question from Karen: what are the pros and cons of deficit spending in the context of Sammamish's current finances? So Aaron, maybe you can just give us a context on what city councils have decided in the past as to whether or not they want to use debt financing as a way to frame that.
Yeah, so the use of debt to finance long-term infrastructure. So we have very little debt in Sammamish. There is an outstanding Public Works Trust Fund loan that's actually going to be paid off here at the end of 2021. It's a 20-year loan for the initial improvement to 28th, the main road through the middle. So long-term financing hasn't been something that council has availed themselves of yet for those infrastructure, but that's certainly something that they could consider in their toolbox. The key question from a debt servicing standpoint is when you finance long-term capital or large project, is how are you going to pay for the debt servicing requirements? So you owe principal and interest payments on those bonds once they're issued. So if you get 20 million in, well, how are you going? What's your ongoing revenue stream to pay for the debt servicing requirements of that financing mechanism that was chosen? So that's the tension that exists on using debt financing for large projects there. But it is definitely part of the mix as part of what can be chosen or considered by council as to how they address and move forward on different needs that they want to address for the city. That could be other types of revenue sources that they could consider. The city has not taken all available revenue sources. They've been very selective on what they've chosen to enact. And so that I would expect that would continue. That's certainly something that's been part of their past conversations to get us to this point. So the pressure point, it's kind of was alluded to before, is expenditures are increasing at a greater rate than the 1% cap, which is your cap on your main source of operating revenue for the city. So that structural difference is what over time really creates a gap that needs to be addressed in some manner. The more permanent way that it's addressed, the better, because that's going to allow for long-term sustainability and stability for the organization. But that may be a progressive step to get us towards that point. You know, it may not all happen at one time in 1 year. And so that's kind of the mixed bag approach that's used as we go through the budgeting periods and trying to address that.
Thanks, Aaron. And do we still have a AAA rating?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do. It would have been on the last bond. The bond was paid off, so it was the last rating we got is a while back now. So we haven't had to get re-rated since we don't have any outstanding debt.
Right.
So it's
Right.
At the time that we would go forward, but at my expectation, we would still be at the AAA level.
Thank you.
Hey, Aaron, follow up to that from Josh. What's the maximum councilmanic debt limit and how is the limit determined?
Wow. Yes. I don't have that at the top of my head, but that is in the financial management report. There's a debt service page If you're giving me a minute, I could pull it up. If you want to take another question, I'll give you the actual number on that. And then it has the calculation for that as well.
Sure. Well, I'll move on, and then Aaron, when you're ready, just please jump in and let us know. The next question is, are there new, as in never used before, sources of revenue on the table for discussion, given the current budget shortfall? Well, let me answer the first part of that. And there are sources of revenue that have not been tapped by the city, for sure. And that's a policy decision that council would make in terms of whether or not to use those sources of revenue. I think the bank capacity is the easiest one to reflect on, is that that's available. Council, they used it for the first time this last budget cycle. And so that's one thing to consider using. And I know in previous years, Sammamish has not taken the 1% as well.
Right.
So those are specific ones. There are other revenue sources related to like transportation that also have not been utilized that are available. Whether or not they're on the table is more of a policy, and quite frankly, for you all, a political question. And at the time where they might be proposed. And then there's always the ability to go out for either a levy lid lift or for a bond to be able to pay for. Levy lid lifts can be used to pay for ongoing services. Bonds are generally used for capital improvements. So those are also policy discussions and questions that are up for council members to debate at the time when the budget is being discussed. Okay, Aaron is still searching. So what's
So
that?
the debt, you want me to jump in for the debt service?
Yeah, please.
Limit? Okay,
Please.
so I'm going to do a screen share here. Let's go to, so this is the financial management report. This is page 8 of the report, and it covers our debt servicing. So this is the outstanding debt and legal debt capacity. So these calculations come right from what's allowable by the state. So just going to scroll to the bottom where we look at legal debt capacity. And so 2.5% AV stands for assessed valuation. So that's how the table is calculated according to statute. And so remaining capacity is this 992 million from a legal debt capacity standpoint. That's where we're at currently. So this walks through the pieces of how much is general capacity, voted, non-voted, what is dedicated towards parks and open space in line with state statute.
To clarify, the non-voted, is that a public vote? Is that what that's referred to?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically council manic. The council can choose to issue debt up to a certain point, as you can see on there. And then anything above that has to go out to the voters. What this also, as Aaron pointed out earlier, does not include is how much debt service would be required to utilize this debt in any one given year.
Can you clarify, I'm sorry, real quick, you've got non-voted, voted, and then under parks and open space, it's blank there. Is that?
Yeah, the capacity is 496 million. So what it's categorizing is under general capacity. So what the bonds are to be used for. There's a non-voted capacity and a voted capacity for general capacity. And then bonds that are for parks and open space. That's the calculation, is the 496 million that had available capacity for parks and open space uses. That's how the state breaks it out into those two general categories. And so when they use that methodology, they don't use the 1.5% of AV, they just take a look at the 2.5% AV. And so that's why that the table is reflecting that limitation that the state has.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, any other questions on the debt capacity limit? Perfect. Everyone, I just want to make sure to recognize people's time. We are almost at 7, but Aaron and Mike and I are certainly willing to go for a few more minutes if you all want to continue. So you'll just give me a head nod. I want to make sure if people have other commitments. Okay. please, we won't be offended if you have to drop out. If you have to drop out, the recording will be available within a day or so. We'll put it up on the website and you can go back and watch if you so desire. Question number 3 from Karen is, what has been the overall Sammamish residents' reaction to the tax increase? This one might be a little harder for us to be able to determine, quite frankly, because I think council members would probably have a better sense of the reaction from the public on this one.
Well, I was thinking you guys might have heard. I was just kind of curious as to just kind of what it's been. Have people even figured out it's happened? Have people complained? Did they come to the office?
Well, no one's come to the office for quite a while for obvious reasons. I apologize. I'm a little bit new here to be able to answer that. I don't know if Mike or Aaron, if you have heard anything, but my sense is that with stuff like this, a lot of times people don't really, if they do recognize it, it's not till the property tax bill shows up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that rolls out. I don't get the sense that there was a big, right. It's a delayed reaction,
Right.
for sure. So, and that's one of the challenges we have, to be perfectly honest, and most cities have, is the budget is people's least favorite thing to want to pay attention to. But if you, for instance, if you propose putting lights at a field, lots of people are interested, but when you talk about the budget, they've got other things to go do.
And actually that ties right into my last question. That has to do a bit about just the finance committee that used to meet and then doesn't. And I was just wondering, is there a better instrument for that? You know, that to help educate like residents a bit, to get them engaged, involved, and understanding this stuff.
I think this is our perpetual, what's the Greek mythology of the guy pushing, thank you, yeah, Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. That is literally us with trying to educate on the budget process. It is a tough sled up the hill, and you know, I think every year we try to approach it from a different angle and see if there's a better way to do it. We put it in the newsletter, you know, we can do a 2-page, send it out to everybody. And, you know, quite frankly, people would rather talk about, you know, dog parks or almost anything else. So it is our, you know, obviously it's the most important thing we do from a staff perspective is present and put the budget forward. So it's important to us. It's obviously important to the council. But in terms of trying to generate interest from the general public, that's been a tougher sell, for sure.
Absolutely.
So if you all have ideas, we are more than open to listening to that. Maybe we can all stand with sandwich boards out on the street, you know, when we get close to the budget, see if we can drum up some excitement for it. But yeah, that's always our challenge, to be honest. So with that, I think we've gotten through Melanie's and Karen's submitted questions. Are there other questions from the group? I'm just going to throw it open. Callie, please. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it's Kaylee.
Kaylee.
I think I lowered my hand. Yeah, no problem. First, thank you all so much. This is really good because I know it's easy to glaze over Excel spreadsheets, so maybe that's part of the issue, I guess, getting excited about it. I did have a question. I know I've looked like in the budget in brief. So our admin and human services is 1.9% of kind of like, you know, last expenditures where that went out. Is there a breakup of what actually goes to human services, and then what does admin mean? Because I know it's not overhead cost, of course, because that would be a lot greater. I just was wondering those separated, what that is.
Yes, there's a different split of human services has its own department. So depending on which document you're looking at, I don't think that delineation is in the budget in brief, but in the larger budget document, it has it split out. So it wouldn't be in the admin services and HR combined line there. That refers to administrative services, and HR is the city clerk's office in HR, and part of the city manager is part of what's considered the administration. And then human services and the grant programs, as well as the Affordable Regional Coalition for Housing, the ARCH, is in the human services budget, which is a separate area of the budget document.
Okay, so different than the 1.9% you said?
Yes, that's showing up in the
Okay.
budget. Yeah, it's in a different category.
And which one is that? Sorry, it cut out.
Yeah, so, well, I can follow up if you want to see. We can go. So the budget in brief attempts to summarize the full budget document. So the full budget document would have all split out by all the different categories and agencies. And the budget in brief is just gathering that and grouping it in together. So it's, I would go back to the budget document itself and pull out just the piece that's human services versus city clerk versus HR. I can certainly do that if you want to, maybe Mike, you want to coordinate an email on that one? I could follow up with the 21 and 22 budget, I assume, the both years you're wanting to see.
Yeah, that would be perfect. And thank you for doing that. I'm glad I
Yeah.
got a clarification on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, appreciate the question very much. We will put the answer to that in the, on the webpage in the question and answer section. That way everybody can, and we'll put a link to that, if you would, Mike, put a link to the actual budget doc, the full budget where that one's set, so you can go in and see where that's reflected in the full budget document. For those times when you can't sleep. Okay, other questions? And since we're here, we'll try to answer anything that's not budget related in the short time we have, if we can. If not, we can follow up. Karen, please.
Just one last question in terms of your role to some extent, because I would be looking to you guys to provide guidance, advice, and to act as internal consultants to the council. And so to that end, I mean, are you able to get out and actually uncover or learn about best practices that are happening, not just regionally, but internationally, so that you're able to bring that type of knowledge, frankly, forward to the council so that they can make more informed decisions? Or is that more really on the council member to learn about that?
I will answer that one, and then Amy, you're up next. I see your hand raised. To answer that question, and Aaron and Mike can jump in, but I would say we have a lot of people in the building who are members of statewide organizations that for their profession area. Like Aaron, I'm sure, is part of the Statewide Finance Association. There's both a county city managers association, but also a statewide city managers and administrators association. And all of those are geared around best practices and bringing things forward to be able to discuss what's worked for you, how does it work, where did you find that? And then there are national organizations like the National League of Cities and other organizations like that are providing information. So whenever we come up with a policy issue, and Mike and I were just doing this today on a topic where we're asking for what are other cities doing, what else is being used that's working well, and then we always try to take that and come up with what I'll call it to make it Sammamish specific, which, by the way, it's hard to say, but to make it Sammamish specific so that we can try to, make it work for us. And then from that perspective, we as staff are always going to bring forward a recommendation from the staff based on our doing research and evaluating the different options out there, and then coming forward with what we think is the best option to provide the service and to be successful. So, I mean, we always strive for that. I think that's the goal, and we're always open to learn, and we have our folks are always looking for the next greatest and best thing to try to provide better service. Amy, please.
I just had a general question. You had mentioned that we have 135 full-time employees roughly, or something like that. How is that determined? And you also mentioned having a lot of contracted services. Why that versus hiring, I guess?
Sure, Aaron, I'll let you take the first one and then I'll take the second one.
Yeah, the 133.25 FTEs is actually an adopted number that's part of the original city council adopted budget. And there's a full table of those FTEs and what positions they are to serve throughout the different departments. So there's a table of FTEs that adds up to the 133.25, where you can see which services that those in-house FTEs are tied to. For example, like was mentioned previously, parks, maintenance, and then the contracted services. So decision points on whether you contract or move a service in-house, those are evaluated as the service options go along through the budgeting process. So it goes through the review that goes through city manager's review prior to coming forward to council. So if there's a change in how that service is to be deployed, or the level of service, or the expectation changes, those are all part of the inputs into that evaluation on whether the service can continue to be provided efficiently through in-house or through a mixture of in-house and contracted service needs. I'm referring generally to new service options and packages that are being considered for existing contracted services. So we have a longer term contracts with public safety. The first one with Eastside Fire and Rescue, which is a longer term interlocal agreement. And so those interlocal agreements do go to council for approval. And that's part of the council governance process when those contracts are originally put in place. The other one is the large public safety contract that was referred to with the King County Sheriff's Office. That's also a multi-year contract and an interagency agreement with King County Sheriff that Scott was alluding to previously on the contracting side. So those that have long-term contract terms, those obviously the contract terms would dictate as to when they would be revisited, extended, altered, etc.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Great question, by the way. Thank you. So any other questions for this evening? I want to make sure that you all have the opportunity. And again, we're going to put up the answers to the questions that were identified during the session here tonight. And if there are other questions, please continue to ask them. I am hopeful that you all find it helpful that we put all the answers on there so that if someone else asks a question, you might have the same one. And so the answer is available to everyone so that everyone is getting the same information. And with that, thank you all so much for taking the time tonight to sit with us. And we really appreciate, and again, I say from my perspective, I appreciate all of you all being willing to take the time and put in the effort to run for office. And we will look forward to working with any or all of you that are successful in your bid for election. So with that, thank you so much. And we will, I'm sure, talk to you again down the road during the campaign season. So good luck to all of you and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.